Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
There are many great misunderstandings about skinwalkers, as popular a subject as they are. Some of them may know that they are malevolent human witches who can turn into beasts. They curse those who are unlucky enough to be upset, and act purely out of hate and selfish desire for power. But does anyone realize that there is more to them than that? Why are the Navajo people so desperate to keep quiet about them? What secrets do they hide? Contrary to their conception in popular culture, skinwalkers are an intrinsically human thing, and are the product of something primal within human nature, something that makes men, evil. It is only ironic that they take the forms of beasts, for their truest forms are within their black human hearts. Skinwalkers are the result of the primal beast in man. They are the ultimate conclusion of the left-hand path, the ultimate evil. There is no redemption, for they have lost their souls for power. Their roar is the roar of the beast. In order to understand skinwalkers, one must understand that they are in no way an original mythology. There are many myths about men who can turn into beasts via skill and knowledge of the dark arts. Those familiar with Norse mythology may recall how two heroes of the Volsung saga don the skin of wolves to cause terror to those around them. Or you may recall berserkers who are known to whip themselves in a frenzy while dressed in animal skin. But it goes further. Werewolves, men who lose all sense of humanity and reason and turn into bloodthirsty animals as the full moon rises. Vampires who turn into wolves, the evil kudlak of Slavic folklore. Men with dog heads who are known to be heartless and brutal. Egyptian gods of animal heads and great power. Rituals undertaken with animal masks. The Minotaur. The Nephilim. All a remembrance of something. Humanity's greatest adversary. The black heart of man itself. The very hidden beast within us all waiting to claw itself out. Those that let it out gain great power but lose everything for it. They become skinwalkers, creators with no redemption or soul, who only exist to hunt and exploit man as they desire for more and more power. Skinwalkers are dead in the truest sense. They have died the second death, and all that is left for them is the vile pleasure that is gained from the suffering of others. When skinwalkers hunt, they don't necessarily kill, they torture. For torture brings them greater pleasure than any kill ever could. There are many ways they could torture. It could be psychologically. It could be via a string of curses meant to ruin the lives of specific targets purely out of the sadistic pleasure to do so. It could be physically. When skinwalkers hunt, they feed. They feed on the suffering of others, for it gives them greater control and magical power. With every tear shed, their magical mastery and dark transcendence goes greater. They will do anything, create poverty, mechanically churn your life into a living hell by creating a system meant to trap and feed on you forever. Pretend to be your friends and manipulate you. Murder for pleasure. They'll resort to anything big or small. They only work out of greed and pure hedonistic pleasure. Skinwalkers exist everywhere, though their very nature forces them to keep their existence a secret. They could be anybody, your neighbor, your friend, even your parents. But they are never what they seem. You see, everyone has the beast inside them. If you are quiet enough, you can listen to it whisper into your heart. Most people have the power to resist, ignore it, and move on with their lives. But some people slowly begin to give in. It seems like nothing at first, but the whispers get louder and louder and louder until the shouting becomes overbearing. They snap, and their lust overtakes them. They turn into horrific animals, and only in a while do they learn to turn into humans again. This is usually because the pressure of the world is too much to handle. This is how skinwalkers breed and create more of their ilk. They birth themselves with the suffering they create. Some are born as skinwalkers. Heartless and cruel, they feed at a young age, growing more and more powerful. But some are ignorant of their nature, at least try to remain ignorant, until they realize what horrific creatures they are later in life. The Navajo have a good reason to keep their knowledge a secret, for only the evilest of evil, those who have lost any chance of redemption, disregard every drop of humanity they once had, become skinwalkers. and no hard they try, normal people can't do this. You must become the beast in its purest state. Skinwalkers are a truly rare occurrence, but for the Navajo, this is different. I know of an unspoken truth, that long ago one great member of the Navajo learned how to gain true power, how to become a skinwalker and shed all humanity. This dark secret has been passed through generations and generations. If the knowledge, however, spreads, then those with already black hearts will be able to gain this power, and humanity will be doomed to a bleak future. There is a demon who walks the plains, who stalks the night. Her shrill voice can be heard through forests, her howl through the throats of wolves. To call her upon her, one would need a sigil. It would cause most men to be insane just to look at it. Once the ritual is complete, and the fumes of the incense overtakes the summoner, a voice that causes agony is heard, accompanied by a wild creature with the body of a woman, the hairs of a beast upon its back, the faces of a wolf revealing its skull, a fox and bear and large antlers on all her heads. Her smell is the smell of the most horrific, burnt, rotting human flesh one can imagine. Her hands and mouths are filled with blood. She teaches many things: how to live off the barren land, how to tame animals, the great mysteries within the sky and earth, the whispering of the spirits that lives in all things, overworldly knowledge of the herbs and things that grow, how to talk to beasts, and how to become one with the beast. I recall meeting my first skinwalker as a child. I lived below a strange man. He acted with a facade of niceness, but when one looked into his eyes, one could notice a fiery hatred, pure lust, pure spite, and not one drop of genuine love. Sometimes I noticed whenever his facade would drop, when he acted purely out of cruelty and sadism, he could be the pettiest of men, even though he tried his hardest to hide it. I am not going to go too deeply into the story, but whenever nighttime approached, I always noticed that there was never a sound coming from his house. We could normally hear everything that happened above and below us, but I noticed a fox creeping around in our garden sometimes. It was a strange fox. Black was its fur. It had striking orange eyes, the most orange anyone had ever seen. I remember one day waking up in the middle of a forest near our house. I don't remember how I got there, but the first thing I saw was the fox. Its piercing orange eyes, the most evil eyes I ever saw. I couldn't move. It's orange, the fires of hell, the pupils, the heartless blackness of the abyss. I watched in horror, as I couldn't do anything, paralyzed in the middle of the night. Closer and closer and closer, and I heard a crunch. I turned my head. My parents had been looking for me for hours and had called the police. I was found. I remained silent as I turned my head to find the fox missing. Later, local newspapers told stories of children missing around the area, but they were never found. The greatest caution when it comes to skinwalkers is to not let yourself become one.
The beast or animal nature isn't inherently evil. It's the ego or I that, when paired with abstraction, makes for the evil in men. Nature, while furious at times and unrelenting, serves as a mirror. I personally never understood the push for always fearing it, or only wanting to see the shadow aspect of primal nature. Physicality or 2D to 3D density is rough, I get it. But a lot of man's suffering would be alleviated with acting in harmony with natural and spiritual law. But that takes freedom of choice. I spent my youth drawing her who is me and I in her. You call it a demon, but it's a fundamental force of creation. It howls at your doorstep because that's the karma of rejection of parts of self without integration. Humanity has rejected the beast in modern times. Some in tribal communities in the past instead embrace it. There are times it's appropriate that a spirit or soul regresses or is broken down by entropic forces for renewal, and sometimes that means being subsumed back into nature. Free will and choice to evolve or wander in any direction.
I believe in these because the Midwest is kind of boring and nature doesn't like sterile environments, especially when it comes to screwing with humans. Anyway, I kind of got a friend of a friend story here I heard a few nights ago. No Greentext because I'm a new lurker. So I'm at a friend's house for a party and we got a bonfire going, and in my theater group I managed to pull up a rep for narrating spooky stories or events, mostly from my few experiences or my friends' stories. So I start off and I'm looking around as I'm narrating my grandmother's creepy ass house, and a friend of mine is kind of lounging over across the deck. He's a cool dude, just really quiet. I continue and we eventually swap stories around about creepy things that happened to us. One of my good friends finishes up an experience and I'm surely convinced this kid is a psyker or some kind of precog. Suddenly dead air, mainly because Lul in stories. Other reason was probably because of the intense heat lightning that had just kicked up. Anyway, the quiet friend, let's call him John, pulls up a seat in front of the fire and starts off. Actually, I have a story. Perfect timing, I ran out of stories. John starts off by saying that this was an encounter his dad had told him a few years back. And thus it begins. John's dad, George, grew up in Michigan, that haunted hellhole of all places, and was familiar with camping trips and probably saw some Innerwood shit in his day. In this particular experience, George is camping in the Texas thicket with several of his friends at the time. And to anyone unfamiliar with the big thicket, it's huge. Nothing but forest for God knows how long. So George sets up camp near a river stream with his friends. And the first day goes swimmingly. They kick back, have some beers, do a bit of fishing and stories around the fire, you know, the usual outdoor excursion requirements. So the second day rolls around, more of the same stuff. Nightfall hits. And George's friend Cliff decides he needs to take a piss. So he wanders off into the woods for privacy. 5 minutes pass, then 10. George is kind of worried, you know, dudes don't take that long normally, so something's up. Maybe he got a bit turned around, no biggie. He lets everyone know that Cliff ain't been back and he's gonna go check for him. So he grabs a flashlight and plows a straight path through the thickets in a rough approximation of where he thinks his friend went. Within a couple minutes, he hears Cliff call out his name. George. John's father thinks he got a lock on where his name came from, so he follows it. After a minute, the same thing happens. George. This time from a slightly different direction. He follows as it keeps happening, determined to find his friend. After 15 more minutes of blindly wandering through the woods, he comes upon an almost clearing-esque space. Lo and behold, there's a Cliff standing there. Probably got turned around and stopped here to rest or something. George called out Cliff's name, and his buddy faced him and pointed to something on the ground and said, "Hey George, check this out." So he pops his flashlight at his friend's face, and at this point he's close enough that he can kind of see his eyes and most of his facial features. "Hey George, check this out." At that moment, snapping twigs marked the least stealthy predator known, and a hand slapped down on his shoulder. Turns out it was Cliff. He managed, "Hey George, what's up?" Apparently, he'd been following him for some time through the woods. "Hey George, check this out." And that's when confusion set in. He shone his flashlight on the other Cliff's face. His eyes didn't dilate and he started twitching and moving his neck at weird angles. It was like Parkinson's. They took off like bats out of hell. Didn't matter where, they just ran. After a bit, they found a river, followed it back and hit the camp with everyone and left that place. After that, John just sat back and looked at the fire. I spouted off a bit of Skinwalker lore to those who had no idea what had happened. I'd gathered off various places and talked with him about it for a couple minutes before someone else ruined the mood with a story about how they'd peed themselves. Apparently, he used to be super into Skinwalker and Native American lore and myth until he heard that story, and I'm assuming more, from his father. In his own words, "I don't mess with Skinwalkers anymore." I know Skinwalkers are a meme here after the cultural rage a couple years back, so I am kinda cautious when it comes to stories like that. But it does seem to fall in line when compared to other stories. Anyway, there's the friend of a friend story.
Not sure if it was a legit Skinwalker, but it was something really weird. Beamy, age 8. Family is from overseas, but comes to the US to visit with family here while we wait on visa and such. Grandmother was brought over from our family first in the 1970s for Ukraine. Take a wild guess as to why we had to come here. Love coming to the US. Hell yeah, Walmart.jpg. Movie theaters that don't play Titanic.jpg. Grandmother saved up from teaching, retired and bought a house outside of town, lives alone. Ukrainian men die at 40 from old age. She has dogs, likes to feed birds and squirrels, says that deer come up to her house and eat flowers outside of her window. There are deer in the area, but I had never seen them. It wasn't a big deal. Grandmother likes to take dogs on a walk. She takes me out and makes me speak English. Won't talk to me unless I speak English. One day in early November, around this time, but not before Thanksgiving out, walking about 2 miles away from her house. All the houses are at least half a mile away from each other, maybe 3 houses away from hers. It's getting dark and we're about to turn around and head back. The dogs are on leashes, but they stay close. The largest dog, husky mix, starts rubbing her nose with front paw. The other two dogs start sneezing, whimpering, and doing the same as the husky mix. Grandma stops and says that there must be a deer nearby and that they always make the dogs sick. I ask her why, as I often do. She says that the deer pick up all the smells of the forest and try to smell that way so nobody messes with them. That didn't make sense. She was starting to go the way most old people do, so it was no problem. Get to turnaround point. Dogs on leashes now. I have the smallest one, yellow lab runt, real small. We turned around at a small bridge. A deer darts out about 200 meters in front of us. Look, barbush! Grandmama, there deer see deer. I stutter her out in my Tarzan English. Hush, anon, do not scare them. The deer has stumbled out of the woods, and I remembered thinking that it looked drunk. I wanted to tell my grandma that the deer was coming back from the bar. But then the deer looks like it was searching for something, like when you drop a little screw or small pill. It was sorting through the brown and green grass. Its antlers were like two little fallen branches moving around fast and low. It had hands. It then snatched up a something. It was black and small. I think it may have been a dead crow. Then the deer stood up on its hind legs. It moved the same as someone who has a bad back, but a strong body nonetheless, like an old boxer at the end of their career. The deer looked up into the sky, extended its right arm skyward, holding the crow above its face. It opened its mouth and swallowed the dead crow in one bite. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I suddenly worried about the deer being able to swallow the puppy I was supposed to get for my birthday and Christmas. I looked at my grandmother, who just had her head pointing downward. "Anon, look at your boots. Deer don't like it if you watch them." I ventured a look back, and this time the deer was standing closer to us. It was standing on the road. "Babushka deer are on the road." "Is because you look at him. Now we must walk home the long way." She turned around and started walking the dogs backwards. They were both walking with their tails down. I thought we had been mean to the deer, but I didn't like that it was taking up the road. Would it be back there tomorrow? We walked back in essentially a big U shape, cutting through her neighbor's property across the street. This took about another 2 hours. When we were cutting through the shortcut, I could have sworn something was watching us. I started to worry about the dog I was walking. People would joke about a hawk being able to take her away. When we made it home, my mother was furious with my grandmother. Grandma told my mother that we lost one of the dogs and had to run it down. I started overacting, and my mum instantly knew we were lying. Grandma stopped taking me for walks after that.
Pretty obvious Wendigo encounter in my opinion. Deeply unsettling if true, and damn good writing if not. Carry guns in the woods, guys.
For anyone unaware, I should probably mention that the Wendigo of Native American folklore fits all the descriptions besides the eyes showing you visions thing. If you look up pictures of Wendigos, they are all caribou-looking zombie things, which is pretty much entirely a fabrication of the internet from like 2019 onward, when like 3 native legends and the Fleshgate Rake got all jumbled together. That cheesy horror game Until Dawn did an all-right job depicting the Wendigos accurately to the legends. Quick rundown. People sometimes starve in the winter months in cold regions of North America. If those people resort to cannibalism, they either become a Wendigo or are possessed by the spirit of the Wendigo, which then turns them into a Wendigo. Turn into a pick related with a few abilities like imperfect mimicry and an unending hunger for human flesh. Entirely different from Skinwalkers, which are essentially bad Navajo medicine men, and not to be confused with the Rake or Fleshgate, which are just creepy pastas.
Isn't speaking the name of the creature supposed to bring bad luck? I've never had an encounter with them, but I've had a Sasquatch encounter, though it was pretty unremarkable.
That's part of the Skinwalker lore. Wendigos aren't really intelligent beings so much as creatures running on pure carnal instinctual hunger. Any Wendigo encounter is due to chance or stumbling into one's hunting ground, not as a result of the Wendigo coming after you in particular, like a tiger eating a random Indian. Skinwalker is the nickname for them, so you don't have to say the Navajo word which is said to alert them. The Navajo name translated to English is goes on all fours, and is most commonly written as 2 words abbreviated YN, if you see it written somewhere else. I'm a believer in this shit, so I really don't want to write it out, and I'm pretty sure I'd misspell it anyway.
quick rundown on Skinwalkers. Generally part of Navajo lore. Medicine man that wants more power. Sometimes for personal gain, sometimes to help tribe in a war or something. The downside is that you have to do something unforgivable. In most versions, it's several dark rituals followed by killing someone who trusts you deeply. Cannibalism is sometimes mentioned, but I think that's Wendigo confusion again. Generally kept secret to everyone who isn't a Skinwalker. Tribe would excommunicate you for doing the evil shit. Gain the power to transform into versions of different animals by wearing the pelts of said animals. Usually extremely large, powerful versions of those animals that are very hard to injure. A more mundane explanation would be just getting in the headspace of an animal. Much like Viking berserkers. Wearing a coyote pelt and LARPing as a coyote might make you harder to see, and therefore you can sneak up on your prey easier. So they're essentially Native American shape-shifting witches. They can't mimic voices or impersonate people outside of internet creepypasta stuff where they are, once again, confused with fleshgates. Just realized I said pick-related and didn't include pick-related. Also, here's a native description. The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones. With its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody. Unclean and suffering from suppuration of the flesh, the Wendigo gave off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. Compared to humanoid bad smell, red lips, pointy teeth, dark/frostbitten/dead skin, gaunt face, pale green eyes, knife-like hands. Smoke-like body at times, and the knife fingers don't necessarily line up, but that could very easily just be a child's perception of a Wendigo, moving erratically and having long, gaunt hands with long nails or claws. Wendigo psychosis is also worth reading about, a legit psychological condition that you could attribute to the Wendigo spirit. Another really big detail about Skinwalkers that gets overlooked is that they aren't inherently aggressive. It's still a person, just one with superpowers. A story that comes to mind is the initial wolf encounter at Skinwalker Ranch, where a large wolf or a very large coyote was attacking cattle, so the rancher shot it several times, and it eventually just kind of left. Whether or not you think that stuff is real, or that it was a Skinwalker, being a large and powerful version of the animal lines up with the lore, and it shows some higher decision-making as well. If it was actually bloodthirsty, it would have attacked the ranchers. It just wanted to spook the hell out of them so they'd leave. Now, if you have a Skinwalker after you, that'd be very bad, but you'd probably have to do something to wrong one.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.